So there's a level of richness that can be captured through video. We can pick up on verbal behaviors, what a person says, or the content of their speech, paraverbal behaviors, how we say the words we say, like our tone, and nonverbal behaviors or body language, like gestures and eye contact. As such, we're able to capture interviewee emotion expressions, communication style, and body language that is not easily assessed through conventional testing. I believe that the video interview format can allow us to better assess attributes such as emotion regulation, communication effectiveness, and leadership.
Essentially, employment video interviews help to automate the normal interview process. And all of our research into what makes job interviews useful still applies. Thus, structured interviews are better than unstructured interviews, for example. So it's critical to follow the structured interview guidelines by using competency-based questions or situational questions that are linked to competency requirements of the target job of which the interview will be used. These questions prompt the best behavioral answers that can be evaluated by a person and or a machine. We've also found case study types of questions can yield good responses provided the competence being evaluated is related to the job requirements. So following those structured interview guidelines, and then building your algorithms to measure expert evaluations of those video interview responses, you're essentially mimicking expert human and rater judgment with the algorithm. Right? So a little bit more detail. So when building these algorithms to score interviews, there are standards to follow with training the expert raters to ensure high quality data upon which the algorithm gets designed. So for example, rater training, calibration sessions, using diverse videos, using diverse raters, etc., are all suggested benchmarks, best practices to use when designing these algorithms. Then when the algorithm needs to be analyzed, if you will, for significant group differences in scoring and how people are performing, following normal psychometric standards of adverse impact or unfair discriminant results. Following these metrics, it can be determined if certain groups like gender, ethnicity, and age score similar or disparate. If significant disparity is found, there's mitigation techniques that can also be deployed to minimize those group differences to within acceptable rates or ranges, if you will.
So when we think about the issues of bias and fairness, we need to recognize that existing interview formats have human interviewer biases. For example, interviewers may favor attractive candidates or favor candidates from their own demographic group. The problem is that they are idiosyncratic. In other words, they're specific to the interviewer, so it can be hard to pinpoint and systematically examine. Automated video interviews rely on machine learning algorithms that are trained on human interviewers. In doing so, it codifies some of these interviewer biases, so it's undoubtedly a problem. Yet, it is also important to note that because these algorithms codify interviewer decisions, and unlike an individual interviewer, we can systematically unbox the algorithm to examine whether they disadvantage specific groups. Moreover, we can take steps to determine what sources of biases they are and adopt mitigation strategies to reduce bias. For example, we can use multiple interviewers with different demographics and train them with the same frame of reference when making judgments. We can also ensure that when extracting facial features that they are equivalent regardless of skin color. In other words, it's possible to test and tweak machine learning algorithms so that it's going to be less biased than any single human being. That said, it's currently unclear if implementations of automated interviews have adequately examined and addressed possible biases. So automated interviews are all the rage now because of their potential. The risks are that they are being applied wholesale before they are known to be scientifically, legally, and operationally defensible. Scientifically and legally, it's critical for companies in the space to carefully evaluate the algorithms of automated interviews. Who are the algorithms trained on? What types of interview behaviors are being used? And what are the potential sources of biases? And whether there's evidence that automated interviews predict outcomes like job performance before adopting them. Operationally, it's also important to determine if applying automated video interviews could disadvantage candidates without access to high-quality video equipment or have a space at home to do uninterrupted video recordings.
There are risks to any novel technology being deployed in situations that have an impact on human outcomes, but an advantage to the technology is the ability to control for and then clearly measure outcomes against well-established standards. I believe this is no different than the risk associated with biased human judgment that has a negative effect on the decisions being made. There are numerous studies documenting various rater errors that occur in person-to-person interviewing. With the approach described earlier, rater errors can be minimized, thus basing the algorithm on the fairest data possible, significantly reducing any chance of common rater bias and subsequent unconscious biases. However, it's still paramount that algorithms are continuously evaluated for bias and fairness, right? And that's a novel with this novel technology that has to happen. Algorithmic transparency is critical, just as the technical manuals are critical to document a psychological test we design in traditional manners. So a single takeaway I would urge everyone to remember is that properly designed psychological measurements follow established procedures by our profession, and designing novel methods of psychological measurement doesn't change these procedures. And in fact, I believe novel methods make it even more important our test development procedures are actually followed.